Great. Thank you for joining us for the next session. We're going to be talking about salt, and today I've asked Irfan from Halotherapy Industries to join us as he is a bit of a salt guru. Welcome, Irfan.
Thank you very much, Erin, for having me.
Everyone seems to have a story about how they got involved with salt, so I was wondering if you'd be kind enough to share yours with us today.
Yeah. So my story is one that's come about on the back of really a bereavement. Really, my father passing away in 2018 is where our journey really began, and where we were back to our homeland. So early 2018, my father used to travel back and forth to Pakistan for business for the last 20 years. He'd spend 6 months in Pakistan, 6 months back. And he got quite ill in January 18. And as a result of that, we actually traveled back to our native homeland after around 20 years, which we'd never had much interest in doing so for that time. And whilst we were there, obviously we lost our father, but it actually opened up to a lot of the things my father was involved in, a lot of my father's family were involved in, which was various businesses in agriculture and salt mining. Once I spent a few days with my cousins after my father passed away, they all started to tell us about the history and my great-great-grandfather and how everyone was involved in mining and how the family have always been in agriculture for many years. And you know, they were saying that your dad's been involved in our little factory, and I was like, wow, we never knew much about this, nor do we actually take much interest. I ended up, from being in Pakistan, was only supposed to be there for a week. I was there for 3 months, and within those 3 months I got to experience parts of Pakistan which I believe I would never probably get the opportunity to do again. We visited the salt range, we visited areas of where there's immense amount of beauty in Pakistan, and I got to learn so much more about the benefits of salt. I spent days at the caves, and I think it gave me a little bit of solace and a little bit of closure actually as well, with my father passing away. And the more I spent time there, the more I really become to think that there was something more that we could bring to the world that a lot of people don't really know about, which is the history, the origins, and really where salt comes from. And that's where it all really began. So over the last 3 years, we've built a new factory. We've moved our production to a larger facility, and you know, having nearly 34 years of experience with my cousins alone, who's been doing this since the early 90s, and then my great-grandfather also being involved and my father being involved, they've passed a lot of knowledge over to us over these last couple of years now. And that's where really our journey has begun. So we now have offices in the US, we have an office in the UK, we have our own factory in Pakistan, we have our own mining license with the Pakistani government, and we're probably only one of 2 families that actually have a complete vertical supply chain, which I think is really important for provenance and transparency.
Wow, well, that is quite a story, and a very special one as well. And I know we've had a number of discussions over the past year, I think, and you have come to be known to me as the salt guru. What you don't know about salt probably isn't worth knowing. So I'm going to ask if you can share some of that with us today. And I know you've got a few slides there ready to share. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Erin. I love the name, the Salt Guru, and that's how a lot of my friends and family are now seeing this as well. So I've put a short presentation together because I think a lot of people know what salt is because we obviously consume it every day, but they don't really understand a lot of the history behind it. So this is where hopefully this will give some insights to the salt journey. So initially, what I'd like to talk about is what is salt and where does it come from? So there's a lot of misconception around salt and its origins. So the first thing is what is salt. So I think one of the biggest things that I've become made aware is when you speak to a lot of people, they think salt is something that is grown and in a sense, even it is grown, it is actually a natural mineral that is found underground. So Mother Nature produced this many, many years ago, and it's been here for thousands of years with us. And as a mineral, it is a chemical product made up of sodium and chloride. And every single human or life form on Earth needs sodium in its diet. So it's there for, you know, various aspects of life and maintaining life. So salt, its appearance, it comes in various forms: transparent, translucent. You know, we see anything from a pure crystalline pink, white clay salt that comes out of the ground, to like a dark pink, to greys and blacks. So salt, what we usually see as white, isn't white. It comes in various colors. For the chemist geeks in us, the properties of salt, a lot of people are really surprised to know that salt is actually very stable, but it does have a really high melting point. It is very soluble in water because our oceans are very, very full of billions of tons of salt. It has a hardness as a solid rock form, which is just as hard as diamond. And people are, when I tell them that it's just as hard as diamond, they're like, wow. And in the industry, most people know salt as sodium chloride, or we've abbreviated NaCl. So that's kind of a little bit about salt and on what it is. The next thing, the history and the importance of salt. So salt can be traced back to 6,000 plus years ago. You're looking at the use of in the Chinese culture, the Ayurvedic medicine of India, and it trades back to, you know, trade along the Nile. Wars have been fought over salt, and it's really surprising when people hear that salt was worth more in its than the weight of gold. So at one point, salt would actually be as valuable as gold is today, which is remarkable. As I said before, it's required for life functions, cellular and preservation of human life. So everything from controlling blood pressure to maintaining cellular activity, for your literally your function, the way you move, your salt is needed for that. It's used to season, flavor, and preserve food. So if we went back hundreds of years ago, we could never preserve food. And once they realized that salt could be used to preserve food, it actually created part of like a little industrial revolution of, you know, being able to harvest food and store them for months, which was never possible before that. Salt used for healing, medicinal and therapeutic properties. So again, in the Ayurvedic or Chinese medicine, and practices that have been done for hundreds of years, obviously, as in bathing with salt, the medicinal aspects of salt that you need in your body is another importance of salt. And I think one of the biggest things that probably a lot of people wouldn't realize about salt is the importance on it in a global scale, which is that most industries, and around 1,600 industries, actually rely on salt in some form to manufacture. And that's from, you know, textiles, caustic soda, which is your bleaches and products you use to clean, the oil and gas industry, and agricultural use for fertilizer. So it's got a massive, massive importance in history, and also just for our daily consumption and trade. So where does salt originate from? So obviously salt does come from Mother Earth. Mother Earth did create it, and it has main sources are from rock salt, seawater, and brine ponds. And there's a difference between each one, and where you will see the biggest difference is where they're used. So rock salt, for example, where we mine our salt from Pakistan in Punjab, rock salt is primarily the way we extract, which is from underground sources. Seawater obviously contains a large amount of salt, but it takes a lot of power to basically filter and evaporate seawater to get salt. And then brine ponds. Brine ponds is quite a unique one because it only works in areas where you have very high temperatures, and where there is access to people that can actually form these shallow ponds and actually evaporate off and literally collect the salt from the surface. So that's quite a unique one. And majority of the times you'll see that the salt origination really dictates where it will get used. So a lot of the seawater salt is used for industry. A lot of the rock salt and brine ponds is where we would tend to use is really used for aesthetics or for food grade edible salt. Seawater does have a tendency to produce a large amount of our table salt, which a lot of people do consume, but it does have a large environmental impact on consuming table salt. So one of the unique things about salt is a lot of people say, oh, it's only sodium chloride. It's all the same thing, but not all salts are created equal. And we can look all over the world and there is so many different types of salt and they all have complete different purposes. And I always say to people that, you can get 4 or 5 salts and none of them will have the same benefit to you as another salt would. And one of the examples you would give is Dead Sea salt is ideal to bathe in, but you don't consume Dead Sea salt because it has too much high levels of potassium and other levels of minerals, which isn't good for the body. Whereas, for example, magnesium salts, which come out of some oceans around Germany, you wouldn't want to consume large amounts of magnesium in that purity. So every salt that we do see on that's available around the world is used for different purposes. Again, Persian blue is an absolutely beautiful salt. It's got about a 75% content of sodium chloride, but the color and everything is made up because of different minerals in there. I mean, you can eat that one, but you couldn't bathe in it because the cost to bathe in Persian blue, you'd be looking at a few $1,000s per bathtub. So again, not all salts are created equal. So the history and origins of Himalayan salt. So I think this for me is really important because I think unless you're physically on the ground and you've spoken to the locals in Pakistan, there is so much fiction around where Himalayan salt comes from and the kind of the origination. And there's so much that you can read on Wikipedia and other aspects. And a lot of people do think that it's available all over. You can get Himalayan pink salt from, several countries, China, you get it from India and you get it from Pakistan. We were very fortunate. Pakistan got all of the pink salt. China never got any of the pink salt and nor did India. So where the Himalayas formed over thousands of years and where the water, the volume of water that was left that was then evaporated and was encrusted underground with huge amounts of pressure actually ended up on the Pakistan side of Punjab. So all the pink Himalayan salt that is available today all comes from Punjab in Pakistan. There is various stories that date back to the early 1700s and local documentation, which you can read in the museums and history in Pakistan, is mining started around the 1800s, and it was a lot to do with the British colonization around the 1800s. And it was actually a British mining engineer called Wharf who helped develop the first mining access to the mines in Pakistan. And the method to use the extraction and the mining that is currently done today now, so this is 200 years later, is actually still the same method. So it's the room and pillar method, which is where you would go into a cave and they would literally take out sections but leave pillars up to hold the rest of the roof up. So it's all underground mining, and that is still practiced to this day. So it is a very labor-intensive process, and the reason that it's still done the way it is because the industry hasn't really moved forward in terms of technology advancements, and also the terrain is very, very difficult to work with. And the other thing that a lot of people do ask is, well, will your salt run out? The salt range is immense. You can travel through the range and it could take you anywhere between 4 and 6 hours to cross the range. And the reserves are in excess of billions and billions of tons. It's immense. You would never, ever be able to consume or even extract the amount of pink salt that is in the ground there. So it's a very, very unique kind of proposition for Pakistan, and they've been given something really unique in terms of its qualities of the product as well. And today, since the British established a mining process, it was passed over to the government of Pakistan, which is now being run by the Pakistani Mineral and Development Corporation of Pakistan, who basically benchmark and control all aspects of the mining out of the mines. So it's quite a controlled process, and the Pakistani government are very involved in making sure that the minerals that are available in Pakistan are done so on a basis which is environmentally friendly, but also it's preserving the integrity of the area as well. So facts, not fiction. Himalayan salt. I hear so much from so many people about of Himalayan salt and what it can do, and you know, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and this isn't everything. There's a lot of other things that I could talk about, but I think the biggest things for me is, let's talk about the aesthetics and the properties of this salt, where there's nowhere else in the world that you would actually get something that is as durable, as strong as Himalayan salt. And I think one of the biggest reasons that we have this is because of the fact that the Himalayan region has asserted so much pressure on the ground there. So when our rock salt comes out of the ground, it comes out in very, very large pieces. And some of these pieces can be up to 5-6 meters long and weigh several tons. And that material, because of the way it was laid by nature, it's got a very, very high compressive strength. You can actually build with the bricks and with boulders, and you can actually, and they have created buildings in Pakistan fully made of rock salt. It's amazing. The color variances, so we all talk about pink Himalayan salt, but really it should just be Himalayan salt, and the word pink really just defines one area of the availability of salt. Himalayan salt comes out from a pure crystalline clear salt that literally looks like a diamond, to a very dark grey blackish color. So you've got a spectrum of various colors that come out of the ground that we mine. The color really does dictate what you can use it for and its purpose. So our family have been doing this for so many years that we look at individual sections and pieces and within the mines, and we basically can decide where this can be used. Can it be used for structural strength for building, or can it be used for more of the consumption side? So within Himalayan salt, the colors really dictate where it'll get used. The other beauty about the salt is, because of its nature and its formation, it's quite impermeable to surface dissolving. So a lot of people say to me, oh, if I put up a brick wall or I put salt up, it's going to dissolve or it's going to melt away. The salt doesn't actually melt. For you to melt pink salt or any rock salt, you need to be warming it to around 1400 degrees Celsius when it will start to melt. It will, I think people must get confused with the word melt and dissolve. What the salt actually does, it doesn't melt, it doesn't dissolve, it sweats, and that's because of the properties of the salt. It's has a property called being hygroscopic, which draws moisture to it, and once moisture hits the walls of the Himalayan salt, it basically looks like it's melting, and that's just one of the unique. It's one of the unique conditions of the salt that it does that, but it doesn't actually. It hits the surface, but it will not dissolve. So a lot of people say when you build these buildings, will they dissolve away? They won't. And I always pose it to people that if that was the case in Pakistan, within that salt range region where we've got billions of tons of salt, it gets rained on so much, but our underground salt reserves are still intact. So there's a unique thing about the balance of the sweating and the moisture in the air and how much will dissolve it. It will take literally thousands of years for it to dissolve, and you would need oceans of water to dissolve that amount of salt. The other unique thing about the Himalayan salt and the region as well is within the caves, the temperature does not change from 21 degrees Celsius. It is optimum all throughout the year, and you could be 100 foot within a cave or 1,000 feet within the cave, and the temperature is constant. And outside it could be 50 degrees Celsius. So it's absolutely unique in what's being created there. The other benefits on a health and well-being perspective is that salt has always been used for various aspects of bathing, the breathing, sleeping, the aesthetics of it, electromagnetic radiations, with things that we've investigated as a company. Massage therapies are all things that Himalayan salt is very useful for. I think one of the most important questions I get asked is, which so many people have used, and I think we've discussed as well, Erin, is does it release positive and negative ions? And I knew this question is going to get asked, and I've answered this for quite a lot of people, and it is virtually impossible for you to dissociate the ions of sodium chloride in a physical state, because literally what you're saying is that the rock salt is releasing its own chemical composition. The ions are separating, but they're still physically intact. So it's not possible to have ionization. Where you can have ionization is the benefits of creating creating the salt where it's not in a solid state. So if it's in a liquid state, you have got ionization, but you've got ionization contained within that container where there's free movement of the ions. Or you've got the gaseous state of ionization where can you split the ions and make them airborne, which is where the unique properties of halotherapy come in, because you've got dissociation. Otherwise, when people sell salt lamps, it's really hard to tell people that you are not getting positive ionization from that. It will take an immense amount of power to get positive ionization. But what you do get, and it's been proven through many, many different research notes, is that the pink salt really has effects on your circadian rhythm. It does have the EMR blocking effects. It does help with the aesthetics, and it does help with your mood and wellness. So there is aspects of that, and there is things that we as a company are now investigating with our team of engineers and chemists in Pakistan about some of the new things and some of the new technology coming out. So that's kind of the facts and the fiction of salt. Naturally different, its benefits and uses. So obviously we've covered some of it in the previous slide, but I think one of the biggest things is we all seem to be now going back to traditional methods of wellness and treatments. As a or of Pakistani Indian origin, we have always studied and practiced what we call herbal, natural, holistic, Ayurvedic type medicine. And one of the most remarkable things that I learned over the 3 months I was in 2018, which since I've literally been back every month for the last 2 years until COVID hit, was I used to sit outside the caves and I used to watch the workers coming in and out. And Pakistan have this tendency that smoking is cool, and a lot of the workers smoke like chimneys. And I would say to my cousin, like, these guys, like, they've got no chest problems at all. Like, they're literally working really hard and they're not out of breath or anything. And my cousin said to me, he goes, these guys spend probably 10, 12 hours a day in the mines. And he goes, when you sit in the mines for so long, he goes, the whole atmosphere around you is just full of airborne salt particulates. He goes, everything in there is salt. The whole environment, what's being created, is salt. And he goes, that has had a massive impact on their health, where he goes, nothing seems to stick or adhere to the inside of the lungs, the respiratory tract. He goes, it's literally cleansed. And I at first I didn't believe him. I thought he's pulling my leg here. But as I watch these guys, I'm not talking one, I'm talking hundreds of people work there. And a lot of the majority of the people that were smokers or had other health ailments, it wasn't as bad as I would compare to somebody else. And personally, my dad was a COPD patient. And when my father was in the UK, he would always have to use his inhalers. He would always have to take them 5 to 6 times a day, where he couldn't even sometimes go up the stairs. When my father was in Pakistan, the climate and spending time at the factory, because obviously they were crushing salt, and at the caves, he would hardly ever use it. So there's so much benefit to salt, which we're now seeing. Some of the other quick uses as well: cleanse and deodorize, because of the purifying properties of the salt, the hygroscopic properties, allowing you to literally draw anything airborne to the wall. So think of the salt as a magnet, and it wants to basically pull something towards it. So it pulls all the moisture from the air. And if you've actually got a large enough surface, you can actually cleanse the air, and it can get rid of bacterial or airborne particulates, or your breath if you're speaking to someone. So it has real good benefits for that. Skin therapy. So my brother's got really bad eczema. I know other people have had eczema, and they've bathed in Himalayan salt, and it's really benefited them. So it's got another benefit of that. The breathing of it is another real big benefit. So, there's a lot of aspects where I think salt therapy can really help in various ways, be it physically, be it mentally, be it emotionally.
Brilliant. I mean, thank you, Irfan. That's really taken us back in time and into the caves, and given a great insight into where salt came from and its many uses. You've brought us nicely onto what is halotherapy, which is brilliant. So I'm just going to take over and let's talk about halotherapy.
Thank you very much.
So the history of halotherapy, the word halotherapy the word halo is Greek, which means salt. And in the 12th century in Poland, people were urged to bathe in mineral waters. It wasn't until in the 1800s when a Polish physician named Felix Boczkowski promoted the idea of salt treatment. And after noticing that the workers in the salt mines, like you've just mentioned, didn't seem to suffer from the same kind of respiratory or lung conditions that the general public did. He actually got to the point where he started prescribing for his own patients to go down into the salt mines for treatment. And that kind of speaks for itself. So moving into the modern day, there's now a machine called a halo generator, which has been developed, which enables what was traditionally called speleotherapy, which is conducted under the ground in a cave, to create halotherapy, which can now be done across the globe in many different ways and forms. So in cabins, in rooms, things like that. So these generators, they grind up the pharmaceutical grade salt or the pure sodium chloride into microparticles, which ideally should be as small as 0.3 to 0.5 microns in size. It's really, really important that you do get these really tiny particles, because these are what can travel further down in the airways and also into the pores of the skin. There are a lot of generators or halo generators out there on the market, so it is really important to consider the various factors, such as what kind of warranty is the company offering, what kind of particle sizes do they produce, obviously the cost, how long it's been on the market. So do your homework, and also talk to other people how they've found their halo generators as well. So the salt for halotherapy in the that's used is pure sodium chloride. This doesn't have the trace elements in there like the pink or the colored Himalayan salts. So the pink Himalayan salts can have over 80 different minerals, such as iron, magnesium, calcium, all sorts. So we tend to keep it very pure because you're inhaling it into your lungs for medicinal purposes. The salt itself is very absorbent, as Irfan mentioned. And what it does is it attracts pollutants and allergens throughout the respiratory tract, sinuses and airways, and then actively promotes for it to exit those areas. So the general benefits of halotherapy include the fact that it's 100% natural, so it's safe and drug-free. It's antibacterial, it's anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial. It's also a touchless treatment, and it is considered safe for all ages. Obviously, we don't consider, or you obviously need to make sure that you've checked with your physician before engaging in halotherapy. And it's just good to talk through your different conditions as well, to ensure that it might not exacerbate it. I've not personally known of any people who have suffered any of that kind of thing, but it's always prudent to just check as well, especially if you're offering halotherapy to clients too. Oh, I've already done that slide. So whilst halotherapy has been recognized in Europe for over 50 years, or medically recognized, we're still finding that a lot of countries aren't necessarily adopting it yet. But it's really important to understand that it's also a complementary therapy. It's not there to replace prescribed drugs. It's there to be used alongside it. It's a safe and affordable way to carry out an alternative treatment. And also there's the benefit there that you don't need to get undressed. You can stay fully clothed, unless you're looking to treat something like psoriasis or eczema or skin condition where you want to have that area of skin exposed. There's nothing to ingest, and there's no invasive procedures. So it's very easy to do halotherapy. You basically sit there and breathe. Obviously, halotherapy can help so many different conditions, ranging from asthma and COPD, bronchitis, cystic fibrosis in the lungs, to the eczema, the dermatitis, the psoriasis on the skin. We've also been finding that people who have suffered COVID, so post-COVID recovery, long COVID, they've also been getting great results from that. There is a session tomorrow, I think, about the results that have been, or the Global Wellness Institute have been getting from doing a study on long COVID. But we're also finding that halotherapy is a great option to help relieve stress and anxiety and aid restful sleep. And that kind of touches back on what Irfan mentioned about the negative ions in the environment. So by grinding them up, you're separating the particles, and it's turning that very positive environment that we all live in, typically referred to as electrosmog, so the invisible radiation created via all the computers and TVs and phones that we're all in front of a lot of the time. And it helps to balance out those positive ions and bring us more into a neutral and relaxed state. And often I'll find my clients in my room fast asleep when I go in to get them to leave. And, you know, it's wonderful to see, but also the amount of positive feedback I get that they've had a great night's sleep or they feel so much more relaxed. It is a wonderful therapy for many, many reasons. But how does it actually work? Well, I like to refer to it as a bit of a toothbrush for the lungs. We all brush our teeth, even though they're white, but throughout the day you get a build-up. And this happens with the lungs as well. We're taking between 17,000 and 20,000 breaths per day. So we're inhaling all sorts of pollutants and pathogens throughout the day. And what halotherapy does is it helps to remove those. It also helps to kill the bacteria that we're breathing in. And as Urfa mentioned, it's very absorbent, so it acts like a sponge and it draws moisture to the salt. So where the salt will land on any mucus, what it does is it draws moisture to that area, then helps to thin out the mucus, which then enables you to expel it much easier. Also, by being anti-inflammatory, it helps reduce the inflammation in the airways and in the lungs and in the sinuses, again, helping to expel some of the mucus. But also for the skin conditions, it helps to soothe the irritation there. Again, with the antibacterial effects, it helps to kill the bacteria on the skin. With the anti-inflammatory, it helps to take out that redness and the inflammation out of the skin. And then again, by being absorbent, it brings moisture to those dry areas. Personally, myself, I suffered from eczema and I haven't used steroid creams in 3 years now since using halotherapy. And also, I suffered a lot with asthma and lung infections. And again, I haven't had to use the inhalers since using halotherapy. So I can certainly speak from personal experience on that one. So that really is halotherapy in a bit of a nutshell. We do offer a Halopreneur program as part of the WHA, and you can, well, we're actually going to be updating that this year to make it a lot more engaging and informative. So please do watch that space. I just want to touch on a few recent salty facts. There have been a lot of studies being done recently, certainly with the onset of COVID, and some of these have been carried out at Alberta University. And here I just want to share with you some small snippets. Sorry, it's got the ad.
To show you the structure of the surgical mask, I cut in the side. It is composed of the 3 layers. Inner layer and the middle and the outer layer. This is the membrane, which is this. And this is made of the fibers, polymer fibers. And each fiber surface is coated with a salt crystal. And the virus is not just the virus particle itself. It is suspended in small water droplet, which we call the aerosol. So like this droplet, but it's a lot smaller than this. It's just a few microns in diameter. So let's say this, the water droplet actually is the aerosol, and this is a salt treated the membrane. And when they sit on the filter, as you can see, they dissolve locally the salt. And with the progress of the water evaporation, those crystals grow up. And we wanted to use the salted recrystallization process to destroy the viruses sitting on this the surface of the filter of the surgical mask. And this video shows the salt recrystallization process, not on the filter of the surgical mask, but on the glass substrate to just like show the concept of what is happening on the filter and how they actually physically destroy the viruses.
So that I think is quite fascinating, but also here we have another short video showing how they're doing the salt filter masks and developing them. We can get this to play too.
Yes. And to do that, it's simple. You create a salt solution and you soak the filter in it and let it dry overnight. And then the salt itself will act to kill the virus when it comes in contact with it, when the droplets fall on it. It may sound unbelievable, but if you think about it, for thousands of years, we have been using salt to cure meat, to prevent it from spoiling. And it works in a simple way. When the bacteria or germs that would go on the meat to create spoilage comes in contact with the salt, it is killed, and so it cannot grow and reproduce and produce more bacteria and feed on the meat and eventually cause it to turn. And it is the same concept that we will be applying here. When the virus particles come in contact with the salt barrier, they would die.
So the more that we hear that studies are being done, I think it works in our favor for halotherapy. And it's great to see that there are people prepared to do these studies. I'll be talking about that a bit later in the roundup of the WHA tomorrow, about what the future of the WHA holds. But I think it is really important that there are studies being done, and the more that are done, the better it is for everyone.